Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel, and in this episode, I sit down with George Guida, an architect, educator, and entrepreneur who is at the forefront of integrating AI into architectural practice. George brings a unique perspective shaped by his education at institutions like Oxford Brookes, the Architectural Association, and Harvard Graduate School of Design, as well as his professional experience at Foster's & Partners and others. As the founder and CEO of Xfigura, George and the team are building a collaborative generative AI platform specifically designed for architects and designers. Xfigura acts as an AI sandbox that streamlines 2D, 3D, and visualization workflows, addressing the challenge of tool sprawl by aggregating multiple AI models into a single, cohesive environment. This approach keeps architects in the driver's seat, supporting ideation, collaboration, and experimentation without the need to juggle many disconnected tools. Beyond Xfigura, George is associated with Architag, a design and research practice that explores the intersection of architecture with advanced technologies like AI and immersive interfaces. He's also a frequent speaker and advocate for applied AI in the design industry, contributing to conversations about how the profession can evolve in the face of rapid technological change. Our conversation today covers a lot of ground, from the practical challenges of adopting AI in architecture firms to the philosophical questions about the future of design interfaces. We discuss the potential of AI to transform workflows, the importance of maintaining architectural judgment in an AI-augmented world, and even speculate about future interfaces that could decode thought directly into spatial designs. George brings a balanced, multifaceted perspective to these topics, drawing on his experience in academia, practice, and entrepreneurship. So whether you're still skeptical about AI, curious about its potential, or already experimenting with these tools, this conversation offers valuable insights into where the profession might be headed and how we can thoughtfully navigate these changes. So now, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with George Guida. George, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. Great to meet you.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to catch up with you at the AEC Tech Conference. I know we chatted before that, but then we actually had the chance to get together in New York City a few weeks ago and got a glimpse at what you're up to during your short presentation, which I think was well received. Anytime you're kind of mixing a beloved kind of tool interface like Grasshopper with some new technology, I think all the nerds in the room were very excited about that. So I'm excited to talk about what you're up to, but welcome to the show. And I would love it if you could start with kind of your career path. How did you get to where you are? Let's go back to, I know you started in Europe, right? So let's talk about where you've come from.
Yeah, it was great to catch up, and your session was awesome with some of the leaders in industry at the AEC Tech. So great episode in itself. Yeah. So I go back. So I'm originally from Italy. I then moved to the UK, and I took the traditional architecture path and went to Oxford Brookes, went to the Architecture Association, and worked across two firms, one of which was Foster & Partners. And that was a real tipping point between the AA and Foster's, which really opened up, this whole computational design, but also computational side of things. I'm slightly different from the typical transitioning person from architect to software, because I'm very proudly still an A for architect as well, and still run in part an architecture practice. So I still very much care about these two worlds. Nice. Foster's really exposed this whole computational technical side. So then I went to Harvard, started my own practice, and that one thing after another led to Xfigura, which I'm sure we'll dive into. Everything AI, everything concept, and happy to share more on that. Yeah.
Cool. So this, you said, you very explicitly said you went to school in the traditional practice. And then, so obviously we've seen a huge evolution, maybe not in academia. I don't know. You actually still have a foot in academia as well. You teach, right? So I'm just curious, like, what do you feel like that brings to a modern architect turned technologist? Like, what does that give you that you feel is useful in the way that you view things and the way that technology is kind of changing our landscape of architectural practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love the academic world, and It's really a medium to test things out and to really get inspired and see through the eyes of students of, what's next, what's coming. There's obviously a bigger conversation, especially we feel it a little more so in the UK than I do at the moment here, of why do we need to go through 5 years of architecture when everything's going to change by the time I graduate? And so that is exactly the type of questions that I teach now in an elective at UPenn and next term back at Harvard. So it's rethinking, education, but also thinking our roles as architects, as designers, as future technologists in this, in the future of work.
Interesting. Well, so can we dig a little bit more into that? I'm very curious what the current conversation is. Like, it's got to go deeper than, well, why do we have to do this now when we all know it's going to change? Because every academic institution has got to be dealing with that at some level, right? We're watching. I think that the trope is that academia is always preparing students for the way we used to practice architecture, and you could say that basically with any era. But architecture is a slow evolving practice, traditionally has been, and not only that, but like the technology that's been introduced is kind of the new version of producing drawings, right? I mean, that's what we called AutoCAD, the digital drafting board, and then Revit is not that different, even though the workflows and the processes are different, right? And you're working primarily in 3D, but the outcome is still two-dimensional documents, right? So I'm curious what the conversation is in your circles around that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's one of the key topics is clearly from the ethical and agency perspective. There's a huge scare, let's say, even from academics, even from students, of how we can be positioned when using AI. There's obviously the early camp, which is don't use AI. There's not clear policies, especially in universities, of where students, where electives or classes should be positioned at. But there's a real conversation to be had in terms of the emerging agency that these tools can give. And so I like to call AI augmented imagination versus, the traditional artificial intelligence, because learning how to use these tools really opens up that solution space. Now, the second topic is clearly from an ethical perspective. We need to have certainly deeper conversations and simply understanding basic technical understandings of how these models work, what the underlying technology and what a black box model actually means. And that comes hand in hand with our standard of care, responsible control. What does that mean in practice? What's our duty to the public once we graduate after?
Yeah.
So process agency is really evolving.
That ethics question is interesting, and I totally get it. Like architects, well, first of all, there's liability, there's risk, there's professional licensure, and I could see that becoming more important in a world where the tools have democratized access to creativity. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I think that's how a lot of people feel that it's what it's doing, right? It's just like, oh, now I can prompt a solution, and that solution is in air quotes, right? It's not really, I think architects know it's not a solution, but at the same time, it's like we've got a responsibility, and so we're going to approach this evolution with that in mind. And then I think there's a lot of the world that's just moving on in spite of that. Right? It's just going full speed. The technology world is really pushing. And I think there's a huge push to just kind of own these spaces. Rules be damned, right? And so it's like, I'm very curious what you think about that, because it's definitely slowing down the adoption, but for very good reasons, right? We have to be responsible. We have to do this responsible. And we're asking those questions, but I'm curious if anything's actually coming out of having those conversations from your perspective. Are you seeing anything literally be addressed when it comes to ethics, governance, responsible control, when it comes to these black box models?
Yeah, it's a great question. So these are the exact questions I'm now actively collaborating on with the AIA and REBA. I'm actually a British architect in their AI expert advisory group. So, how can practices from small to large position themselves, especially from a internal policies perspective, vis-a-vis clients, end user agreements, NDA agreements, confidentiality, and all of that, how can we be well equipped in this landscape, especially also since everything's getting much more competitive, moving much more faster. So there's a clear distinction, let's say the European side versus the US side. In the EU, actually in the UK, it's not far off. The EU AI Act certainly put a lot of guardrails in terms of AI developments, in terms of transparency of models, which it's the usual question, guardrails versus stifling innovation. Where do you position yourself? The US on the other side is much more laissez-faire. It's more, you can think of it more as a train, which is great for innovation, but a train without, distinct brakes. And this falls more under like the state to state level. And the European model is the Belgium effect. Belgium adopts a policy and it's the Brussels effect. It then spreads. In the US, the equivalent is the California effect. We've had a lot of conversations with NCARB in their, national meet. I gave workshops on regulation, AI, and architecture. And so how can we, bring that into industry? California is very progressive in this compared to the national conversation. Let's talk about deepfakes. Let's talk about transparency of our models. So then bring it into architecture. Okay, how can NCARB and AIA put up a clear stance so that as an industry we can be more responsive or make custom solutions? So I think there needs to be more conversations. We need to be more proactive as an industry versus where we're currently standing as being more reactive. And so hopefully in the next few months, at least on the AIA side, we'll put out a report which gives this advice of how companies can be stamped, how can they be positioned in this age of AI. It's a little more proactive than reactive, let's say.
Do you have any just kind of any information that you can share regarding that, or just maybe even just your thoughts in that space around how companies can be more proactive without maybe having to wait for this report from the AIA, just as maybe talking points, but also things that to get the gears turning in the head so that we're not in that reactive space, so that we can start to reposition ourselves into the more proactive space in regards to AI and these tools?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as part of my, let's say, of our architecture practice, we've done a lot of AI consultancy work for medium to large size practices. So it goes from like working with management on AI strategy to custom tool building to onboarding training. That was pre-Ex Figura. The clear first step is management approvals. So it needs to go top. It's an equal conversation. It's come bottom up from, let's say, the data users, but you obviously need management approval. And so there's a clear cultural shift happening. So the first step is very much sitting at the table. Once a month, regularly, once every 2 weeks, you name it. Let's have a conversation of the state of affairs, and let's see how that affects the day-to-day practice and what that means for responsible AI. Every practice, I think, should, at least in my view, should come up with its own policies, but its own stance of defining, how do we position ourselves vis-a-vis our clients, vis-a-vis our contracts. And it's definitely a needed conversation. But
yeah. I mean, that when you think about that cadence that you say is required, which I agree, because things are changing so quickly, like where is the best place for people to get that information? Do you feel like, I mean, is it just through osmosis of absorbing the fire hose of news that's shooting on everybody's LinkedIn feeds all day long, every day? Or what is there a place that you feel like really can distills it down so that people can have the conversation on what has changed literally in the last 2 weeks that we need to be considering when it comes to these conversations?
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, so some resources, high level. With REBA, we put out maybe a few months ago, the REBA 2025 report that covers, let's say, across, it's AI across spectrums. It goes from education to policies to, ethics. There's a bunch of interesting resources just there. The AIA were due to launch the new version, but last year they also had a report. Then there's several books in the space. Obviously, publishing in the AI space is a big risk because the moment you send it to your publishers and the moment it actually releases, it's pretty much dead.
Right.
But I do believe Phil Bernstein's books are really great, and he took a really proactive stance in one of the latest, the older now Reba books. From a webinar, let's say online resource perspective, you're welcome to listen to the NCARB webinar that I hosted as well on regulation and AI. Apart from that, LinkedIn is a great resource. Twitter or X is actually surprisingly a space.
It's
but
just a lot, right? It's just a lot. It's
the AI noise is
overwhelming.
relentless.
Yeah.
And so, but I will also say that you don't actually need a large team. There's this common misperception that you need to be the Fosters, the Thompson Tomasettis, or the big practices to engage in these conversations. Bring it down to lower level. Let's have the interns or let's have junior staff really be actively engaged and at least, starting that conversation.
This episode is made possible with support from Avail. Is your firm managing architectural, landscape, interiors, and engineering content? Avail's all-in-one content management solution stretches across all disciplines, file types, and content locations so production teams can find everything they need all in one place. Thanks to Avail's desktop application and Revit, AutoCAD, and Civil 3D plugins, teams can consistently find and reuse all types of content, from specifications and calculations to 3D models and plans. As a result, standards-compliant models and drawings are easier to create, the documentation process is less chaotic, new hires are easier to onboard, and projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. Visit getavail.com to request a demo. That's getavail.com to request a demo. My thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. It's interesting to think about how quickly that landscape changes, like you said, and so anything that's in print, you're like you said, is probably outdated already, right? As soon as you send it. So it seems to me like this is probably one of the more overwhelming points when it comes to this conversation, is like, how do we even keep up with the current version of the conversation? It's moving faster than ever. And that's something that firms didn't have to used to do. And so it's hard to modify behavior when projects are like, they're the train in the architecture industry, right? That train's going and we can't put on the brakes because we've got deadlines. We've got to put all of our focus into these. And so it's hard to take your focus away and just keep up with this constant scrolling of information that's coming at us and changes.
Well, the best place is maybe this podcast and
maybe, but I don't know. I like to think of this as more broad than specific, but there has been a lot of talk about AI for sure. But and there are some specific AI and AEC podcasts that are probably better resources for this kind of thing. But I'm very curious, like, what your students think about the inclusion or the infusion of AI into the academic side of things. Are they excited? Are they nervous? I mean, to me, and I've been saying that I've been kind of theorizing or just tumbling ideas around, and my latest stance is I'm extremely concerned for students, because what's actually becoming very apparent is that experience, wisdom, time in the trenches is what is actually going to be the super important part about getting projects built. Licensure is, I think, going to be more important than ever, just from a risk and liability standpoint. I don't necessarily agree that the way we go about licensure is. I think that's going to have to change as well. I think that's going to have to evolve. That's always been a lagging process, I feel like, to the way that practice actually runs today. But I'm curious what your students think, and if they're seeing the same thing, or if they're, like you, maybe more excited about this augmentation. And I would love to hear what you think about that theory, because I'm concerned for the younger people not having anything to do, because the tools can do a lot of it, and you also need that extreme oversight part of it to really, if these tools are being used, to really go through like with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that everything is still falling under the standard of care, that there aren't errors and omissions, that there aren't hallucinations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and the answer is that we are experiencing a broad cultural shift, and it's not specific just to architecture. It's across all industries, really. There is it really depends per school. I'm clearly positioned either at Harvard, UPenn. I also taught Northeastern and Wentworth. There's definitely more of an interest in these schools towards these as an average, but I would say I've been to several conferences and seen the academic landscape very much, and there is still that healthy share of skepticism, which I certainly do welcome. Let's be critical of AI. Let's talk about our agency. Let's talk about our role in the upcoming years. An emerging trend is definitely, or a common theme, I would say, is certainly the question of energy consumption of these models. Why should we be using these when they have such environmental impacts? And it's a super valid question. And the bigs, the big companies are not always transparent for the consumption of, let's say, a pre-Google, pre-search, pre-AI search, Google search, and a post-AI Google search. Like, is it a ×5 factor? What's the implication? What's the implication of data centers on supply chains, lithium mining, you name it? Like, the supply chain is so complex. So that's the environmental side. There's clearly the agency, the control side, which is definitely apparent. But I would say, at least in my classes, we go from ethics to building tools versus using existing workflows. It's very much about, learning how to vibe code, learning how to, from no code background to building functional apps, 3D viewers, or actual tangible interface. So having control over that end result, over the workflow, versus just being, let's say, passive, reactive, or strictly from the creative side. So that really, this exercise, at least from my perspective, really opens up the possibilities and how students can keep control and, keep agency within that process. So there's definitely, at least our final review is in a week. So it'll be exciting to see some of the final results. But there's always this mixed bag of excitement and one. I can dive deeper into risk and liability.
Yeah, well, I'm also curious, who do you think this impacts more, or more quickly? Even maybe it's more of a time scale than a question of roles. But I'm curious what you think about that. At least, in the short term future, do you feel like there's going to be people in industry who are more impacted than others? Do you think it's generational in that way? Do you think it's role based in that way? Do you think it's time from graduation? Like, do you feel like this really impacts new graduates, or do you feel like there's still going to be the tool operator hires for these larger firms because they have absorbed, or they have the ability to absorb new technology and new concepts so much more quickly?
Yeah, it's a great one. Even if the AEC industry is, still today quite slow in terms of adoption generally of new technologies, I would still say all of the new graduates coming out now will certainly live this on a day-to-day basis. AI tools will be an integral part. It might not be sold or, described as AI, but underlying technology will certainly be there. The Gartner hype cycle, we're kind of, the use case stage of that is starting to pan out. What at least a question, at least from a practice perspective, is very much, do we invest in our people or do we invest in new technologies? It's like huge dichotomy. It's like, where do we position ourselves? Because clearly what you described is, to be the best architect, you need to invest those years of, the grind of manually making the CAD, the Rhino, the details, and learning to be in the trenches. But
I don't know if it's tool based. I feel like it's more just like, we've been through it. And so of course there's like the waterproofing details and the hold downs and et cetera, and the shop drawings, like, do they actually match what we designed for? Do they match the design intent? But there's also just you can't do that because in this climate zone, like in this and that, and the thermal expansion, and it's like, well, that's locked in here. And so that's where I'm getting at, like, like that oversight idea is more of like the battle tested. We did it wrong 40 times and then we figured it out and this is what works. And there's like two guys who know that in the firm.
Well, let's say my provocateur hat on to putting it on is, what if we can embed that enterprise knowledge within an AI model? And
for sure.
We've built...
Can you do that though? Can we?
Yeah.
Well, I know we can. The question is, are firms doing that? Are they investing in that part of it? Some are, for sure, but a lot of them have no idea how to do that, or what is not the slowest, most painful way to do that. Because I think everybody thinks, well, now I need to write everything down that I know. People don't even know what they know until it comes up with a situation, right? So
we have gone through this cycle with several practices, medium to large, actually, in building custom tools. And I'll give you one example of what this could look like. For the technical people, this means it's an agentic RAG model, a retrieval augmented generation model. So essentially, at a high level, you're removing the hallucinatory aspect within a traditional LLM, and you're empowering the LLM to essentially access your enterprise knowledge. Drawing sets, RFPs, project proposals, any documentation, if you want, even your whole drive or SharePoint, you name it. That means we're adding a semantic search level on any types of documentation. So it's becoming more accessible to the smaller firm. There's certainly, it's a cost associated in preparing those drawings, going through archives. There's a manual process, of course, in that. But for the data-ready practices, you've overcome quite a bit of a step. If you have the intranets, the open assets, and these systems, you're already a huge leg up to be able to plug in an AI RAG model, agentic RAG system, and then move fast and then you're a full AI-enabled practice.
Can you explain that without all of the AI terminology?
Yes.
Because I know what you just said. I understand, but I know there's people who are like, what's RAG? What is semantic search? What is this and that and the other? Like, explain it without like you're an architect, so you know how to talk to architects. Talk to architects who are not technologists. Yeah,
of course. I'll give you a fun example. This was, let's say, more jovial and in passing, but from a big firm, one of our clients, they have one of the lead architects is retiring. So he's got maybe 40 years under his belt of experience. And in conversation, we were like, what if we could train a model based on all Billy's or Bob's knowledge? And so could we record him for 24 hours? Maybe this is not the best example. Could we record all of his knowledge or take all of his past projects, drawings, details, and embed them into some sort of local collective intelligence? Okay, let me bring that back a second. Traditional search is very limited in the possibilities. When you search a document, it's very difficult at times to find that correct detail, that correct drawing or RFP. Now, AI unlocks, let's say, an understanding of meaning within each page, within each paragraph. So it's essentially summarizing or extracting a new level of understanding of all these documents. What that means is that we can actually find documents and then generate new texts, new RFPs, new drawings from that past knowledge. And so you are moving at an incredible speed compared to previous, finding the right document, not getting the right fit to what you're searching for, and then informing your next step.
And the RAG part of that conversation really comes down to kind of your firm's way of doing things, right? Your vocabulary, your terminology, your concepts, the way you do drawings. It's more of a specific approach to the way that you operate, right? So that's what RAG is really. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right. It's based on, it's trained only on your own knowledge plus the ChatGPT 5 model, for example, the latest model. So you're connecting all the power of a large language model with all the knowledge from your practice. And so merging the two together this is all data secure if you're, We've built custom solutions. There are some on the market today. Data security is key, but it means any junior level person talking about like investing in the person or investing in the technology, it supercharges the junior person entering into practice and means they can go, or at least have contextual knowledge of, what does it mean to go into DD stage? Or like, I'm at DD stage, I have no idea what to ask. And the way I grew up, obviously similar to many in the audience, is ask the guy next to you, go to the partner, like do that manual, or like go to the actual library and find the doc. Now it's just so immediate. So there is certainly still that value of empowering even that junior and really pushing that process.
Yeah, I mean, the way that used to happen was exactly as you described, or it was just through osmosis of being in an office, right? You would just overhear the project manager yelling at the contractor about something on the phone as they pace up and down the hallway. And it's like, you can't not hear what's going on. And that's part of the mentorship process. It's like you're being mentored through osmosis of being in the office, or you're just hearing the conversations that are in passing. And I think that's where like there's all this gold to be found. And that to me is the really difficult stuff to actually pull out and codify so that it's somewhere in some rag, right? That allows you to pull from it. But because a lot of times, stuff goes into the email, but it's not everything somebody's thinking. So you can't just get all of their email. It's like, well, that was the stuff that was safe to say in an email. There's all this other stuff that was way safer to say on a non-recorded phone call, but it was still needed to be said, kind of a thing. And that's the stuff that's not getting captured in any way. That's the stuff locked into Bob's brain who's about to walk out the door. Right. And so it's not a foolproof solution, but it is better than doing nothing and just saying bye as Bob walks off into retirement, right?
Yeah, and that really, it proves the thesis that early adopters will certainly reap the benefits now. The democratization, the access point will certainly flatten in time. So, yeah, dive in.
So do you have any kind of examples of how people could do that right now? Like, what is out there right now that isn't maybe a custom solution to have a ChatGPT 5 reasoning model look at a RAG? Like, how could somebody spin that up and just give it a try and actually say, hey, there's value here, and then show that to the partners and say, we should be doing this?
Okay, there's two examples I'll give. The first one, the Hello World, let's say the entry-level tool to use, is one by Google. It's called Notebook LM. Conceptually, this means drag and drop your 10 to 20 documents, your notes from past meetings or whatnot, and then you can retrieve information from it. So you can literally make a podcast of that embedded text or those reports while you're walking to work or something, you're preparing for a meeting. You can literally prompt in and say, make me a podcast about this and make it in this tone or like for 5 minutes. You can make diagrams, videos, presentations, like that's like the Hello World. The second step, maybe not to jump into other tools, is our own. So XFigura, we're looking into embedding these systems internally, and that will be much more accessible in the coming few months. So happy to chat now.
Yeah, I mean that if there's a way to do it now where you can actually look like, so Notebook LM is a great example. When you were saying that, I was thinking, that sounds like a great way to study for the architecture registration exam, right? It's like, let's talk about risk and liability and AIA contracts, and just make me a podcast about that I can listen to on the way to work
and make it fun.
Week. And make it fun, right? I mean, because the alternative is to look at, the flashcards or the books or however people are studying now to, I know there are a lot of on-demand kind of recordings and videos and things like that. But if you can make it fun and in a certain tone and explain the concepts in a way that is within the time frame that you have when you're commuting, that sounds amazing. And so I think that's a great example that you just gave, because it applies way more to studying for exams. It could be, I had these challenges coming up on my project. We're going to figure out a way to do it. How have we done that in the past? How have we gone about solving these kinds of issues before? And at least have that under your belt so that when you show up, you are supercharged, as you say, to kind of take that challenge on and bring up those ideas for that discussion that's going to happen around that issue.
Yeah, and we've had clients who have used these implementations we've built, and they've used it in real time on a meeting with the client.
Just okay,
right there on the spot. Okay, what did we do in that past project? What's the summary of? It's like an immediate answer.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's probably some allergy to showing the secret sauce sometimes. And so you're clearly saying, no, like we have this IP, we have this RAG model, we have this information at our fingertips. Why would we not do it right in front of our client and show them that we have this kind of capability to solve the issue way more quickly than, oh, we're going to go back to the office and pull this out and then bring it forward later. I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, but at the same time, I'm sure there's an allergy to showing the secret sauce sometimes.
An analogy, it's an allergy which is synonymous to what the evolving values of architecture are, because there's an inherent or implicit push towards efficiency first, and that's more industry-led than anything, versus what we obviously want, which is, to produce better architecture and to produce more sustainable designs. Like there's so many different values or lenses upon which we could, approach the same question.
You talked earlier about this kind of idea of augmented intelligence, right? So tell me what you mean by that. And I guess I would love to hear some examples if it's like, whoa, I would have never thought of that. That to me was what I pull out of a general statement of augmented. It's like these tools give you access to connections, or they make connections between things that maybe the person who's running those tools has never had themselves. And so tell me where you're coming from with that.
Okay, I'll give you two examples. The first one is from high school students, and then I'll give the Xfigura example.
Okay.
The first one, last year I collaborated with a company called Monday.com, their foundation specifically. In collaboration with with a larger team, we built out a full curriculum for 600 high school students on design, architecture, and 3D printing. These are students who were taught first how to sketch, entry level, let's keep agency, let's do everything manual, and then empowered that workflow to go from zero to product through images, 3D models, 3D printing, to actually tangibly see something they imagined. Let's empower that imagination. Let's give young students tools that they can thrive to really push at least that vision of what they could be or what they could do. And that was super empowering. We had hackathons. There were students who, didn't have any background or really knowledge beyond the Snapchat AI feature, the Instagram AI feature of like how to do these things. So super validating seeing, giving a tool to that imagination. Now, the second one is obviously from the Xfigura perspective. We see this day in, day out. Especially, recently we hosted a webinar with Big and Zaha, one of our bigger clients using the tool. And really to see the quality that they're reaching from an early massing model or a sketch to do iterations and push the design direction without even going too far into the physical model or the massing model. So it really poses like a separate question of like in concept stages, how much should we actually rely on that manual, adding all the details to make all the options that spent 3 weeks making like 5 options, or if you know how to use Grasshopper, push that needle, when we could have a 1-day sprint or a shorter period, smaller team potentially, and really map out all that solution space and then go manual after.
What do you think that does to the profession? Because you explained like a really exciting thing. I totally get it. And faster with less people, right? So what do you think that does to the way that architects work, or maybe even just, I don't know if we know what it does, but like how do you see that affecting the number of people in the profession? Do you see that like we just don't need as many people in the profession if these tools become super prolific inside architecture firms?
Yeah, there's multiple ways of answering this. There's not obviously a clear answer for it, but certainly what we're noticing is if you're a great designer before pre-AI, you are an awesome designer post-AI.
So great is less than awesome. Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I get it. So that's the augmentation. Yeah.
A huge augmentation. It's like you can really, really push the needle, and those mark the outliers versus the noise which we're commonly seeing. You know, the Instagrams, the LinkedIn's, the general posts. If you embrace these tools, learn how to use them, you can certainly have a different competitive edge than the common perception of a flattening curve. And I oppose the idea of AI leading to a homogenization in like aesthetics, form, and typology. Certainly can push the needle. That solution space will really, you can create crazy hybridities, crazy shapes, crazy forms if you know how to use them. There is a huge value, certainly at least in terms of positioning oneself as an office. It's important to be aware of its, risks, that these could bring in the next decade potentially. Some potential routes for this is certainly keeping an eye out of these peripheral industries. And so we've commonly discussed pre-AI, obviously, architect as developer, as operator, as prefabricator. There's so many models that AI can really supercharge us versus, why do we have to wait for real estate to then hire the 3 architects to do the amount of work that a whole firm would do when we could flip the model? There's still democratization on the other side of the spectrum, and let's really dive deep now in architect as developer, these are like the common use cases. There's, it's died down, of course, now, but metaverse, VR, spatial computing, there's, real estate, there's a whole world of peripheral. I'm not saying this should be the trajectory, but there's obviously that, to keep these things in mind is definitely something to be on the table. There could be potential gaps. So imagine I've described fewer people, faster, which is not necessarily the values that I'm pushing for, as opposed to higher quality designs, higher value to your clients, which you could upcharge by itself. But you can, but there's, sorry, I left my train of thought, but there's certainly values that, in those gaps, you can start taking on potentially more projects, or you can potentially extend those design stages, which is not necessarily always where a client might say, if you can produce faster, if you could produce the same amount in a shorter period of time, they might not necessarily be up for a longer concept design stages, which is what we might encourage. So there's multiple routes. There's not one clear answer, but all industries will certainly be changing, and we're definitely seeing it so radically, especially in programming now. Obviously, so many programmers using coding or building AI models, or that's their first beachhead, that's their first market. And in the legal industry, legal is such an interesting use case because it's so text driven. Text is like the 101. Text, image, video, 3D. That's kind of the we're in 3D, so we're a little safer, quote unquote. There's clear there's clear complexities in the AEC industry, supply chain, 3D modeling. Like there's enough complexity to protect us for, let's say, the short, medium term compared to other industries. Legal, text. We just need a plug into Microsoft Word, and we have automated 50+% of some legal, tasks. And that's happening now. And that's an industry which is time as value, like so centrally embedded into its pricing model. So that could lead to it being aware of what's happening out of architecture will help the discussion too.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company Avail, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. I feel like where it typically falls or has fallen, and maybe it just continues to do this, I don't know, is, just doing more. It's like BIM didn't make it so that we could go home earlier, right? It just made it so that we could do more. And so at least that's how we've applied it to our practice. It's like, okay, LOD 400, let's go. Let's figure out all the things and cram it into the time space that we have always had for SD, DD, and CDs, right? Which is, it's good on one level, right? Like design could never be done as far as a designer's concerned, and we can continue to design at finer and finer detail and work out that design intent and get it into the documents. And I kind of feel like that's how these tools are going to be applied as well. There will be pressure, of course, internally and externally to say, okay, now you actually get half the time because the tools are allowing you to produce this information a lot faster. To me, it seems like if you're actually going to be producing better design, more back to your thesis of really wanting to push the envelope of what we are capable of in our firm with our designers, then you're going to say we still get the same amount of time, but we get to iterate it on 50x instead, for example. I mean, I see architecture still really falling more into that side of things, but still having to have that internal conversation of the pressure of doing things for the sake of efficiency and productivity.
Right.
And I feel like design needs to sit in front of that. It needs to have more importance because the value of architecture, it sits there. It's like more design, more time in the project figuring things out is a better outcome. It always leads to a better outcome. Of course, we have to cut it off at some point, but less time has never been a good answer for producing great architecture.
That's that 100% in line. That just becomes a fun negotiation for clients because
fun.
If you, this is something Eric Cecil from Harvard has also described. Essentially, that curve of value perception from a client. If you reach that 90%, imagine you reach the 90%, but you need 2 more weeks to reach the 100% of the best value per time and whatnot. Is a client going to want to invest in that extra 10, 15% maybe? We're obviously in our own perception, we're perfectionists in architecture. It's never a finished game. So we would like that, but it will be exactly that fun conversation to express that value add.
I mean, if you look at it like a game, then it could be fun. I think, and it should be maybe look like as a game, like, we're going to figure this out. We're going to play this game. I think that's a good approach for a lot of things, but a lot of people don't think of it that way. They're like, oh my God, that sounds like a horrible thing to have to figure out with a client. But it's coming, right? It's literally coming. This is one of those things that these negotiations, these conversations are going to have to happen because it's happening all around us, and the pressure is on to address it in this industry. And I don't necessarily mean that addressing it means adopting it wholeheartedly. I know you're probably more on the side of the scale of like, yes, this is a good thing. I think it also makes the argument for boutique firms who say, we absolutely don't use any of this stuff. It is 100% human creativity. Yep. And I'm curious what you think about that idea in this space. Do you think there's value there?
We've seen this historically through time, and we're definitely, I think the technological divide, made by a human or made, non-AI generated architecture, there'll be an inherent value in that. I'm not opposed whatsoever with that approach. So, it's going to be interesting. There'll be the heavy adopters, but there'll be I feel a bigger and bigger camp over time of the non-AI users and as value. A client, a client who doesn't want a company to use AI might go just to that.
Right. I have a philosophical question for you, George. So do you feel like AI is a tool or a service or some combination? I've recently been thinking about it, like Grasshopper, Rhino, Revit, whatever, ArchiCAD. Those are tools because like you're making the decision to do this thing. But then there's like this kind of outsourcing of maybe it's a little bit of creativity, maybe it's a little bit of I mean, obviously, with this idea of large language models and seeing context and things that maybe, pattern recognition and things that it can do for you is like, whoa, this is pretty amazing. But do you feel like that is doing a service to you, or do you feel like it's a tool that you're using? Because you talk about it as augmenting, and so then I start to think of it as a tool. But I'm curious what you think about that.
I have shifted my lectures from describing AI as a tool to AI as a collaborator. And collaborator, if can be seen analogous to service, and you could potentially,
especially when there's a subscription involved.
Yeah,
but tools cost money too. I mean, it's just
Yeah, and this fits well within this year's, let's say, development of agents. I would say this year is very much the year of video and agents. In the next 12 months, we're going to see a lot more develop in the 3D space specifically, which is what we're obviously pushing on heavily in Xfigura. So combining all of these agentic workflows, 3D, how can you make it fully multimodal? So agents can be seen as a single agent. And just to kind of give context to what an agent is, an agent can be seen as a single ChatGPT model or a single large language model in conversation with other models. They have contextual history of past conversations, these context windows, which is what they're called, of that memory size is getting bigger and bigger by the month. And they are able to formulate or do hierarchical reasoning to a certain extent, to plan, to use tools, MCPs, or to use just reason or get an answer, prove, validate that question, or go back and continue that cycle. So from the single agent, it becomes a multi-agent process. And so can you, as a practice, build out customizable, multi-agentic frameworks? I'm going way too deep into the jargon, of course. But, and so then you can start moving to create custom solutions for not everything. We can't replace everything, but for like the documentation, for optimizing some 3D workflows, creating drawing sheets, doing compliance optimization, checking all your drawing data set. There's more and more tools coming out there. You cannot obviously replace client-facing, soft skills, people to people, public-facing. There's a whole world just in there. So I think the service idea, this collaboration, seeing AI as a potential collaborator is definitely going to emerge. And we are exploring it as well. So clients are coming to us and saying, could you help us across, in this competition, across these stages? I have this unique scenario in which we still run the architecture practice, but we have this SaaS model. So what it becomes, not uniquely for us, and this is why C's, for example, Y Combinator's, let's say, ask last year, it's SaaS plus service. You build your custom tools. In the future, in the next few years, you can just vibe code your next app, your next workflow, make a custom proprietary solution, and then offer that service, and you become an AI-enabled practice. So it's kind of this hybridity between empowering you as an architect, the traditional architect, but also somehow offering AI as a service too.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about it from that point of view, because you've got the ability to make tools on the fly, right? And you're using this kind of outsourced body of information, body of knowledge, and you can just plug in whenever you want and create stuff. Like one of the things that we saw at the AEC Tech Conference was Turner Construction. Do you remember that presentation? It was where they basically said, okay, ChatGPT for everybody, 15,000 employees. And now they've got people in HR and people in finance vibe coding apps to do things that they could have never, obviously they don't have developers in those departments. They don't have time to do that, but now they're just doing it on the fly. and it's completely unlocked certain things that saves them a ton of time, right? And it also gives those people agency to solve their own problems.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting model. It's incredible to see them doing it at that scale, and there's an obvious cost implied with getting enterprise licenses with ChatGPT at that scale.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, I would almost want or encourage an AEC specific solution. I mean, you want it to be catered, you want it to have that enterprise knowledge. Rolling it out with an incredible speed across all parts of an office can potentially be a risk in terms of, not letting anything fall in the cracks or losing accountability so it has to be done, I think, at a certain pace within industry. Yeah. But awesome.
Short digression here, but I think something that I'm seeing lately, we see it with resumes, we see it with RFPs, we're probably seeing it with legal documents, and I could just see this snowballing into architectural documents, right? Which is, okay, the AI writes the RFP, the AI writes the response to the RFP, the AI checks the AI's response to the RFP. You can see where this is going. I mean, yep. Is this? To me, this is something to be concerned about. Like it's especially when it comes to like a design competition. Are we just going to have the AI tools really augment us and create the entry for the design competition only for another AI to review the submittal to the design competition?
Yeah, it's scary.
We're outsourcing everything.
I don't think it will be universal. I like to think it won't. But we're going to definitely see more of these use cases, especially from a validation perspective. Mm-hmm. What I find scary is seeing this in light of licensure, in light of our role, our responsible controller, or our standard of care, because the ball falls on us as architects. And that's today. And I'm just going to have this as a provocation, but in the EU, I think it's a liability act, a product liability act, which conceptually can shift an AI model's liability to be similar to that of like manufacturing. If there's a defect or hallucinated response, could that AI model assume a certain level of liability? That changes our current system, which means could the Autodesk, could the Revit license or all licenses now, they give you full liability of anything you do on these tools. Right. It's just fair.
Right.
Could that model in future, I'm not saying in the next decade, maybe slightly longer, what if that model shifts? Then we're really like, if we need to have like a different discussion about what licensure means and what, the scary cyclical loop of verifying with AI and us positioning ourselves within it. And I'll caveat just to say, and this is what I teach, how can we embed from a tooling perspective the necessary feedback loops within these systems to keep our agency, to keep the right checks and balances within the system. Xfigura is all about this. This is our thesis. Process as project. Can we dissect your whole workflow, give you full visibility in a node-based accessible system to see what our inputs are, what our outputs are, and across all the different modalities, text, image, video, 3D. So it's designing, it's at the core of it, it's, pre-use, it's design the right systems to keep the right values as a profession. That's what I'm really trying to push on.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. I want to talk about Xfigura, but this kind of snowball effect that I'm talking about, I think it's just, I want to touch on it one more time, in that the concern really is like convenience wins, right? That's human behavior, is convenience wins. This is why DoorDash, this is gig economy kind of stuff. It's like, okay, what's the easiest thing? Because we have busy lives, and there's even more constantly knocking at the door of things that need to be done. And so we're outsourcing the email writing, we're outsourcing the summarization, it's like one person shows up to the meeting and gives a lecture, and there's 8 AI note takers that have also joined the meeting, right? It's like everybody sends these as proxies of themselves to the meeting because they don't have time to be there. And so everything is getting to that, are we just seeing more versions of that, right? So it's like, oh, now it's the image making, now it's the 3D models, now it's the video, and it's just like this constant kind of orchestrating. And so, I mean, how does that fit back into, and I think this is where we segue into ex figura, right? Which is this, okay, you call it augmentation, but it's like, how does this weave its way back into responsible control, but also just kind of, like the lame way to say it would be master builder, right? It's like this, you have this orchestration, you're just constant, but all these things are doing the work for you on your behalf. And of course you need agency and you need the way to check into all that. But is this making things worse, or is it making things better for architecture? And I guess what it really comes down to is, what do you think that, and you have a foot in practice, you have a foot in academia, you have a foot in technology, the value of architecture? Like, what is the value of an architect and architecture to society? Do you feel like it's going to be more widely distributed because architecture is really for the 1% of the 1%? I mean, if you really step back and look at it, the most people hire architects to do the 1% of buildings in the world, or maybe it's 2 or 3%, but it's not a lot of percent of total buildings in the world. So is the value get more distributed because it's more available to everybody because more projects can be done, or is it actually going to water it down even further, and just make it so that more people can do more buildings without architects? Like, where's the value proposition lie in there for capital A architecture, and could that become more widely distributed?
An interesting analogy is what I recently heard in a talk with radiologists. There is that same perception that you have a machine learning model, you train a data set on non-cancerous or non-malignant or malignant tumors, or like these type of examples, medical imagery. So can, the levels of accuracy, especially in machine learning, which is more deterministic than, the hallucinatory side of generative AI, considering that efficiency gain, the response, the accurate response rate, will we have less radiologists? And at least the last few years have actually seen a rise. And there is that question. This is what you're describing here. It's a broader democratization. There's actually higher demand for these types of services.
Because there's more need, there's more cases than
more cases.
There was a huge bottleneck before, and now that bottleneck is.
And the big part of the bottleneck was, cost and maybe time, or like, and so now can we move? I do think there's definitely a really interesting conversation about that post 3%. And so these tools will definitely open up a whole new category. There is definitely that scare, which is what I call the mid-journey effect of, the lay person, the non-architect who comes to the client, which is, scary, comes to the architect, which is a scary thought. Okay, build this. This is my mid-journey image.
I've already done all the work. I just need you to draw it up.
Execute. Let's go.
Yeah.
That's, I guess.
That is not a new conversation. That's been happening forever, right? Except it used to be an image out of Dwell, or it used to be a sketch on grid paper or whatever. It's like, I just need you to do the drawings. And so again, there's like a mismatch of like the value of architecture, which these tools I think are putting a magnifying glass on.
Yeah.
Because they're superheating that idea, which is like, I really don't need you except to get the permits approved. Right, that's your value, is because you have a stamp.
So coming back to your idea of orchestrator, the terms that are being used now are orchestrator, curator, let's say that higher, controlling manager of these systems. I think that's where our value add will certainly lie in, connecting the right pieces, and it's like we're going really deep into like the potentials of AI, but I do want to take one moment to step back and say, in AEC, the actual development of AI tools, the real use cases are so typology and use case dependent even today. So we're talking about like many small segments, a lot of noise happening, this will flatten over time. But really, if you think of like the crux of like CD or DD stages of like going from an LOD 100 to 300 or like these type of workflows, it's very niche, and its adoption is still on the lower end. The potential is huge, but we're like, just the frame, like we're still in the earlier days. I'm different because we've entered into the market from an ideation and visualization perspective. The ROI or the value add is much more apparent, but for the later stages, it's still quite nascent.
Hey everyone, let's take a quick break from the conversation to pay some bills around here. This episode of Troxel is brought to you by Troxel Plus members. That's right, my incredible paid supporter members are making this episode possible. Their direct support ensures that I can continue exploring the intersection of architecture, technology, and the future of design with the leading voices in our industry directly to you. So let's talk about why you might consider financially supporting the podcast too. By becoming a Troxel Plus supporter, you're not just helping sustain these conversations, you're also gaining exclusive benefits like ad-free episodes of the show and my Leadership Edge email newsletter, where I analyze episodes and deliver the insights and key takeaways right into your inbox. Your small contribution makes a huge impact. And if you've been enjoying Troxel and want to be part of the community that keeps it thriving, please consider joining today. Head on over to trxl.co and click the subscribe button either in the upper right-hand corner or at the bottom of the page, or you can visit a link that I've put into the show notes. Once again, my sincerest thanks to the Troxel Plus members who have made this episode of the podcast possible, even though they aren't even hearing this ad because theirs are ad-free. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, and it's difficult for people to adopt a tool that they have no trust that will be around in 6 months with the landscape changing so quickly.
Right.
So why even invest in this tool? Because we just don't have the foresight to say, are they going to be here to support us when we actually need them? Because these projects take 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think this orchestration level of, being in charge of the human to human, the client facing, the public facing, for any public consultation, you can't send an AI, nothing's really going to happen in that case. So there always needs to be a factor of, that human in the loop. And I can push the needle as a provocation on the other side if you want to.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So for the Venice Biennale this year, we submitted with a team a project which conceptually we tried to close the feedback loop of projects post completion. So you think of the architectural cycle, you do a project and then you finish it and that's it. I've never seen
the next project.
You go to the next project. I have never seen myself post occupancy evaluation details or like real feedback from users in that space 1 to 5 years down the line. Mm-hmm. So could we conceptually close the loop and bring agents in the workflow? So I'm going into the weeds, but what it means is from a 3D perspective, we're using Unity. Can we have a building before, imagine a parking lot. We scanned a parking lot in Boston. We converted it through AI workflows, video workflows, 3D Gaussian splat workflows into new designs, more sustainable facades into residential buildings. And we asked physical agents, so large language models connected to values, names, professions, to each respond to certain metrics which we asked it. So those could be like, is this walkable? Is this safe to you? What is your perception of this compared to the previous design? Some metrics which we previously can establish. So you've got 200 agents walking around your new design, assessing based on your criteria, so you can really inform that full cycle and then keep control and keep iterating as a loop. I was just attended as a provocation, as a way of potentially re-seeing what simulation in its traditional sense could mean versus.
So you're looking way farther out through, like, okay, you're saying, okay, this is the design. It has been done. It's now been occupied. And then we're going to go into the future and we're going to have these agents review all of those criteria that you said, and then you're going to take that information and you're going to infuse it back into the design phase and continue. So you're creating a way forward-looking feedback loop into the design process.
Could be fun.
It could be fun. That sounds like a pretty legitimate use case.
I think it would really help validate, and this is back to the value proposition of that quality, that design matters approach. Mm-hmm. Could we start really informing, validating beyond the obvious need of optimization, performance analysis, environmental, all of that, of course. It's like the qualitative side plus quant.
Is there a value add, or I should say a monetary or a contract reason to, a version of, like, does that change the way that architects operate now and how they charge their clients? Or is that just like the evolution of current version of practice, do you think? Assuming that provocation becomes reality, let's just say.
I like to, on the short term, this is not for this use case, but across the spectrum, on the short term, I think you can certainly upcharge, or there will certainly be a universal value add. Unfortunately, the flattening of that curve is, there is potential for that to happen. So
right,
it might be different.
It just becomes normal. Yeah. Interesting. Well, okay, so let's segue into what you've been working on with Xfigura, and give us an overview of your platform and how you're going about solving an architect's early design concept phase issues, their problems, their opportunities.
Yeah, so Xfigura is a platform we launched about 8 months ago. We're now a team of 9, we're starting fundraising now, and seen a huge growth in the last few months. So been really excited to push into this new space. We are essentially, you can see us as a collaborative platform or a Miro-like interface where we combine all of the best generative AI tools into one. So essentially, there's now there are 52 models live together with an AI agent, which help accelerate or help improve that design quality from a concept design stage. The idea is simple, super accessible interface. You can create presentation boards, you can collaborate, you have full data security, which is essential from an enterprise level, and you can bring all teams into one space to design those concepts and actually not be sucked into the reality of the now. The noise is real. We are the noise catcher, and we're the few, one of the few companies that can approach a client, approach a large, medium, or small practice and say, if you've been testing some AI workflows, don't know where to start, or you've been sucked into this noise, we will remove tools from your plate, and we've packaged them all into a single accessible interface for AEC-specific workflows.
So by taking, I go to ChatGPT for this, I go to, Notion for that, I go to, whatever. You've got all these different tools out there, and they're all kind of, you have to go to each one of them to use them. What you're saying is you're pulling all those into one canvas so that all of the work is happening in one place. So that simplification is that I go to one place to access all of these things and apply it to conceptual design.
Yeah. And an example of that is using our Rhino plugin or Speckle integration. You can import an image or a 3D model from these, and you can do your whole workflow. So it's early massing model. Let's do an image-to-image workflow. Let's use the latest Nano Banana Pro. Great marketing term. It's the fun hype of the moment.
Very catchy. Yes.
Very catchy. But the image quality has changed visualization forever. The level of coherence that we have now is unprecedented to what we had 4 or 5 months ago. And so we're able to take that massing model, ideate across options, and then potentially make facade modules in 3D or export 3D models or iterate or go back to an aesthetic style. Or there's so many different use cases, and giving users that full canvas and control over the whole process is such a value add.
I would love you to give your best shot at explaining what the interface looks like and feels like to use. I, of course, want people just to go over to the website and just see it, because the image definitely will speak for itself when it comes to it. But when you describe kind of what the Xfigura interface looks and feels like, how do you explain that so that people can get an understanding of it?
Yeah. So you start off by creating a board. This can be shareable to clients or to colleagues internally or to other students who've got a big academic community using this as well. And once you enter into that project, essentially it's a canvas. It's an infinite digital space, like an infinite Word document, but catered for any different modality: text, image, video, 3D. Essentially, it all boils down to a single node. A single node can be seen as a whole platform in itself, actually more than a platform, because that single node where you can put a prompt in, generate text or image or the other modalities, it gives you access to all the other models. The example is for image, you can use OpenAI. You can use the Google models, the open source Flux or TRXL models. And so within each node, you can then generate images, import images, and then create a full workflow. So you can see it as a very accessible form of Grasshopper. You're connecting,
because I feel like you waited too long to get to that point, because the it's like Grasshopper or Dynamo. It is a canvas in which you drop these nodes onto, and then you can string them together into different configurations to create basically a recipe, right, of outputs, and those can fork and they can do all kinds of different things. But okay, so when you say an infinite canvas, like Miro, like an AutoCAD drawing, whatever, it's just this big blank space, and then you drop or you create these nodes, and then you start to string them together to create workflows, basically.
Yeah. And you can create templates, so automations. You can publish these, share these, or for onboarding, you have a full set of them, and you can, with 1 or 2 clicks, you can have a full upscaling, in-painting, 3D pipeline that's just, 1 click away.
Nice. So you said you have access to 52 different models, and those are large language models. They're also image models. They're video models. And so, like you said, this is multimodal. So you could, for example, could you give a couple examples? I don't actually want to make any examples of maybe some simple workflows that you have your students start out with, for example, to just start to explore how to use a platform like this.
One of the Hello World, the first exercise that I do with students is giving them an understanding of how these models think. And so at a core of using all of these models is understanding what prompting means, knowing how to communicate a design intent or a general intent of whatever result you want to these models. Now, you have to understand that each model is fully subjective. There's no such thing as an objective data set. And you have to prompt each model in a slightly different way. And so learning the exercise I give is describe an image, so bring in an image of a building that you're interested in. It could be like a Louis Kahn or something. Drag it in. Describe that manually. Okay, then let's use ChatGPT to use an AI large language model to describe that image.
Yeah.
And then let's find different ways in which a machine versus human will describe a single image. And then let's generate an image from that and compare that before and that after. So then we go into the nuance. Okay, language matters. We want to give information about materiality, form, lighting, all of these things which are maybe implicit when you're designing in a different way have to really be pulled out. And that was partly a thesis of mine from many years back at Harvard. It was repositioning the role of language within the design process.
Do you find that having an architectural training helps in that process or hinders in that process? Because I think about it from like the readability of architecture. It's how do normal people, how do muggles, non-architects, how do they read architecture is going to be very different, and their description of it would be very different than an architect's reading and description of architecture. And so I'm curious if one has a more useful part in this process or not.
Yeah, disciplinary knowledge is still essential, and that's what I kind of tell my students as well. And knowing how to describe architecture, knowing how to describe form, that's text. Knowing how to convey an idea also from a physical model. The physical model or craftsmanship for me is not dead in light of AI. For me, it actually gains a whole new value. So could you do a physical model, iterate, test out different forms, or sketch? We're seeing so much more use of sketching. You know, go from text, sketch, or physical model. I've not even touched a computer in this, like, you know, first category. And then from that derived form, derived ideas, connected those to different pipelines. So obviously, you know, architecture school, those first years, essential in getting that base, you know, that core knowledge.
You know, this idea of, okay, so I used to show this video in some of my presentations. There's a great YouTube video. If I can find it, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, of these two parents handing their two kids a legal pad with a phone number on it. And then they had a cardboard box on a table between them. And they said, okay, your job is, you have 3 minutes or whatever it was, maybe it was 5 minutes, to figure out how to dial this phone number. And they took off the cardboard box, and there was a rotary phone underneath it. And hilarity ensued. It is really funny to watch, because these kids have never even seen a rotary phone, let alone like know how to work it, or, you know, they barely know what a phone number is, because the contact is in their phone. You just tap one button and it does all the magic. You don't even need to know how to. So, you know, it's a few minutes long, and it's, I won't spoil the ending. So I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But like, is a keyboard the next version of that, right? Where it's like, we don't, because as you're explaining what you're talking about with sketching in particular, it makes me think back to a few years ago when I think it was HP had a computer with an overhead camera, and it was really meant for creative people, and it was like watching what you were doing with your hands, and it wasn't about the keyboard. It was about sketching or pulling in you know, arts and crafts, and, you know, making collages, and then it was capturing that in real time. And then it could do things with that. It would, and this was before AI, right? So it wasn't like really understanding what it was looking at yet, but I could see now with AI really being like, okay, it actually is watching me sketch this thing, and it is building as I'm sketching. And who needs a keyboard anymore? Like, that's the next version of the rotary phone to me, because of voice. Yeah. Right. This just natural language aspect, but also the ability to, with this multimodality, and you could see that happening in real time, being kind of a really incredible tool for architects to be able to use.
A clear example of where interface could, you know, at least attention interface as a question is going towards, was OpenAI's recent acquisition of Johnny Ives' company, and that merger really is, I think, is going to start pushing the conversation.
OpenAI just basically said, like, hardware makers like Apple are our competition, not other AI companies. Right. It's interesting.
So we've been saying this idea, in the next 5 years, VR or spatial computing will, you know, see a new wave. It'll finally land. But but I feel as if we're in a potential, like, in the hot 5 years now. And I recently saw my students do engage in VR. We go into spatial, you know, physical computing and whatnot. So I think and this is what I teach. The triptych I teach is architecture, interface, entrepreneurship. So I teach them how to build exactly what the future of interface might actually look like. And so it's fascinating as a topic. You say the keyboard, but there's obviously the next step is voice. And so voice, okay, what's the limitation as a representational type in language, in voice? And then the next step, okay, let's extend to spatial computing. Okay, what does that mean? Like, I'm thinking VR, gravity sketch, a physical interface. Are we standing to design? What is that like? What is that interface? Are we doing it collectively? Should we use the World Lab models or Genie 3? These, like, what is the future there? And conceptually, just to push the conversation, I have a lot of fun doing this generally, is really, let's think of what the future could be. One future could be, and that to express this, I'll use Meta's recent research, which is, okay, now we can decode thought as text. So text to brain thought, or I'm thinking something, I can express it as text. Okay, step 2, and there's already published research on this, thought to image. Can we decode thought and express it as a video or as a single static image? So then conceptually, let's think of that in AEC. Thought to image to 3D model to construction documentation. Could you imagine, could you dream a building hypothetically, conceptually in a provocatory way? What does that mean in light of what interface could mean? There's a lot which could come in the next several years.
Yeah, I think about that as kind of designing from the inside out, which is like you start with the experience, right? And and you are explaining or imagining as you in physical space are walking through something, and you're pointing at things and you're like, okay, and here, this is where this, and if I go through this tight space and then it opens, and you could see that how that could lead to, I mean, based on your description that you just gave, I could see how that could lead to the creation of spatial elements, right? Bounds, or, transparent levels of transparency or whatever that would then translate into models, that translates into drawings, that translates into the physical built environment. Could be an extremely powerful way to get ideas built, right? I mean, to have that translation be a much less manual process to make it happen.
Yeah, and the debate in this context is about the potential loss during those moments of translation. There's a representational shift. And so when going from a thought, our imagination, we have to put that into text. There's a loss and there's a gap.
Totally.
There.
Language it fails us in describing things so often. And then there's the layers of interpretation of the person receiving that on the other end, which also leads to potentially a lot more loss, right? And so language is not a perfect medium to do the things that we're talking about, for sure. And so, like you're saying, if there's a more direct connection from thought to output, that could be really incredible.
Let's build it out.
I like the pregnant pause there. It was like, yep. This has been a fun conversation, George. I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today that we could extend this conversation even further, or do you feel like we've exhausted this round? Where are we?
Yeah, I think we've covered good ground, and it's been a great conversation. If anyone is, of course, interested in Ex Figura, happy to share more information, and we're only getting warmed up here, so looking forward to bringing you guys along this journey with us.
This has really been great for me too. I feel like some of the provocations that you brought, I mean, I like how you're looking at it from multiple angles and not just really driving from I mean, this is actually one of my criticisms of, you mentioned the report on AI that the AIA released this year that was, I think, just really benign. Like it was just like, and here's the state of the, most architects are just watching from the sidelines. It wasn't like, here's where we're going, here's what we need to do about it. It just didn't really hit me like that. And so I feel like because you have this kind of, this perspective of, okay, here's one way to look at it. Here's a completely different way to look at it. I like the balanced nature that you're bringing to this. I'm glad to hear that you're on that team that is going to help this industry kind of focus on where we're going, because it's hard to focus with the extreme fire hoses of information that are constantly blasting us with all the changes and the game changers and this changes things forever and this new model, and constantly being bombarded with that. It's like it's overwhelming, but it's also just kind of like, oh my God, if it's just going to change every 3 days, I might as well not even pay attention. So, I mean, that's the reality of practicing architects, is they've got deadlines and it's hard to keep up. And so I appreciate that there is some guiding force that is happening and that you are involved on both sides of the Atlantic as well, so that you can bring those perspectives to it as well, and note the differences in the way that people are operating, but also try to bring all that together into a cohesive thought. And you've got academia, and you've got practice, and you're doing it all. I hope you don't burn out too fast.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate the energy you're bringing.
Excited to be with you. And yeah, thanks for the conversation.
Absolutely. All right. And I'll have links to everything that George was talking about in the show notes for this episode. Thanks, George. It's been fun.
Likewise. Bye, everyone.